Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World video. This is Thegameconomist, and today we're going to be talking about which weapon fits your playstyle. My goal here is to give you an impression of how each of these weapons feels. Specifically, I want to talk to you about what is unique about all of these weapons, and hopefully this will allow you to make a decision on what weapon you really want to invest your time in. The weapons in Monster Hunter World, they take a lot of investment. You have to save up a lot of parts to build them, and then once you've built them, it takes a while to master using them as well, a lot of experience. So if you really want to get into this game, you really do have to spend some time with one weapon class, at least one weapon class, and that means picking one out, right? So hopefully this video helps you out, and if it does, be sure to let me know. I'm just going to go from the top of the list to the bottom of the list, all 14 weapons. Let's start with the Greatsword. The Greatsword is a weapon that rewards you for very, very careful positioning. The way it works is you're going to have to charge up a heavy swing, and this swing is going to have a slow animation, and it's going to deal a ton of damage if it lands. But yes, you have to position yourself just right and not get interrupted. When you get more skilled with the Greatsword, you learn more technical moves like being able to shoulder charge into the monster's attack so that you don't get flinched. You also learn how to do things like guard the monster's attack at the appropriate time. I would say if you love using a giant sword that is very slow but deals high damage, choose the Greatsword. Next, we have the Longsword, and I would describe the Longsword as a counterattack weapon. One of its main moves, it rewards you if you predict that the monster is going to attack, and what you'll do is when you activate that move, you'll be able to dodge through the monster's attack and then punish the monster, and all of that is just built into one of its moves. So this is really a weapon where if you're good at counterattacking rather than rolling away from the monster, you're really going to enjoy it. Next, we have the Sword and Shield. I would say use the Sword and Shield if you want to have tons of mobility, the ability to guard, and the ability to consume items without putting your weapon away. That's a big deal. Like some weapons like the Lance and the Gunlance, it takes forever to put your weapon away. With the Sword and Shield, you can actually eat while your weapon is drawn, okay? So being able to eat consumables is really one of the styles of using this weapon, and what you find is people will often consider using like a wide range build. Wide range is one of the skills in the game. Basically, it allows the potions you eat to affect your allies, so in a way you get to play support when you're playing Sword and Shield, but that's one way of using it. There are other ways to use the weapon. You can use it where you just use quick light attacks close range to the monster, and people will often do that to cause elemental damage or to cause status ailment. And then finally, I believe there's a last popular way of using the Sword and Shield where you use a particular combination that'll cause your character to jump up into the air and come back down to deal high damage. I would describe the Sword and Shield as one of the more versatile weapons in the game, with its two major faults coming from A, having kind of short range, and B, I feel like it doesn't really have the same damage ceiling as some of the other weapon classes. Like some weapon classes can really just pump damage out. Sword and Shield is never really going to break through that damage ceiling. After that, we have the dual blades. Imagine if you put the shield away on Sword and Shield and you just grabbed another big knife. That's the dual blades. They're known for having a flurry of attacks that deal very high damage. However, when you go into the flurry of attacks, you're very punishable by the monster, so you're kind of taking a risk when you do that. These weapons are also probably best known for needing to manage their stamina, right? So this is one of the first weapons where your stamina kind of decides how much damage you can do. And finally, I would say the dual blades are defined by their short range and being able to dodge. Next, we have the hammers. So the hammers are the first blunt weapon that we're talking about on the list. When you hit a monster on the head with a blunt weapon, you're going to build up a status known as KO. KO will knock a monster over, allowing you to deal even more damage. And that's really important for the hammer. The hammer's moveset is really set up so that you deal the most damage when a monster has been KO'd. It's also interestingly good at aerial attacks. The hammer is able to use a technique called ledge hopping. I have a video on ledge hopping. If you're more curious about that, I'll leave a link in the description and the comment section. But yeah, the hammer can ledge hop. Also, when you go down a hillside, you'll start to slide, and you'll go into a really powerful air attack where you spin through the air. It's a very fun weapon. The downside to using a hammer is that it has very short range, and it has a lot of recovery frames. So after you're done attacking, your character needs time before you can go into your next attack. After the hammer, we have our next blunt weapon in the game, the hunting horn. So the hunting horn is very much like the hammer's taller brother, and what the hunting horn does is very different from any of the other weapons in the game. This is the only true support weapon. Like, we talked about the sword and shield, how you can build wide range on it. Well, with the hunting horns, you're always going to be able to support your teammates whether you build for it or not, because hunting horns are defined by having buffs that are built into the weapon, and as you fight with the weapon, as you hit the monster, the buffs kind of build up and you're able to release them. So if you enjoy both using a blunt weapon to try and KO a monster on the head, but also giving your team buffs like attack buffs and defense buffs, you're going to enjoy the hunting horns. I will say that their playstyle feels a little more complicated, like you're juggling more things in the air than you would have if you had simply stuck with the hammer. Moving right along, we have to talk about the lance. The lance is a shield weapon. That is, its playstyle is really defined by the fact that it has a superior guard to the rest of the weapons in the game. It also has unusually good range, which is something you remember every time you switch over to using it. You go, oh yeah, this is a weapon with a lot of range. If you want to deal a lot of damage with the lance, you have to constantly be poking the monster in order to get that DPS out, and then when the monster goes to attack you, you need to predict that they're attacking you or react to that correctly, and the lance, you can either choose to simply guard that monster attack, or you can even try to counterattack them, which is something that the lances do as well. After that, we have to talk about the Gunlance. So the Gunlance and the lance are actually very similar in the way that they move, and the way that they guard, but the way they attack is pretty different. The Gunlance has a lot of slower, higher damage moves, and those moves are explosive as well, whereas the lance is a playstyle that involves a lot of quick jabs and reacting to the monster with the counterattack. The Gunlance is all about either shelling, or using long combinations that deal very high damage. After that, we have two weapons that I really haven't used as much, so I don't feel like it would be fair for me to give you too much advice. I'll tell you what I do know, because I have used both of them, I just haven't used them extensively. The Switch Axe and the Charge Blade are weapons that can morph from one weapon type to another weapon type. When you're using the Switch Axe, you're either going to be in axe mode or you're going to be in sword mode. When you're using the Charge Blade, you're either going to be in Sword and Shield mode, where you can actually guard the monster, or you're going to be in Axe mode. And I feel like with both of these weapons, you're rewarded for charging the weapon up, and then for using long combinations where if you don't interrupt the combinations, they deal really high damage, but if they get interrupted, the damage falls off pretty quickly. Okay, now that we're done talking about the Switch Axe and the Charge Blade, we have to talk about the InsectGlaive. The InsectGlaive is one of the more technical weapons in the game, and I think it's one of the more difficult weapons to use in the game as well. So when you watch people showing off the InsectGlaive, the impression you get is, wow, this is a weapon where you're going to attack from the air a lot, but that's not really how it plays out when you actually start using the InsectGlaive. First of all, the InsectGlaive is powered up by sending out your Kinsect and harvesting Kinsect juices from the monster you're fighting, and that's actually kind of complicated to do. It kind of requires you to be good at shooting and aiming, similar to if you were using one of the three ranged weapons in the game, the bowguns or the bow. So you start the fight out that way, and then you move on. Once you've harvested 3 times for the monster, you move on to actually fighting. Well, it kind of turns out using your jump attacks isn't necessarily your best form of damage. Your best form of damage is done from the ground. So you can use jump attacks when opportune moments arise, like if you're going to dodge a monster's move, or if there's some other reason that you should be off of the ground. But a lot of the time, if you're trying to put out optimal damage, you're just going to be standing on the ground anyways. And with the InsectGlaive, the attacks come out pretty quickly, and they're not like auto attacks. You actually do need to move between the combinations, similar to some of the other combination weapons like Switch Axe, Charge Blade, and Gunlance. Okay, and that's the InsectGlaive in a nutshell. Why don't I move on to talking about the light bowgun? The light bowgun is the first of two bowguns. In Monster Hunter World, you have the light bowgun and you have the heavy bowgun. And I would say both of these weapons are very technical. There's a lot of little details to learn before you're really any good at them. You gotta learn about how to read how the weapon uses the ammo type, like recoil, all the good stuff, right? Like how much ammo is it holding? So yeah, the bowguns, I would describe them as technical weapons, and when you're in the fight against the monster, you spend a lot of time managing your ammo, and that often means crafting new ammo in the middle of the fight, and that means going into your menu to craft new ammo. So they're a very technical weapon, and they require you to be able to use menu using skills. I don't know if that's a very good way to describe it, but that's really how they feel. Other than that, they play like regular guns like in any other game. You aim at the monster, you shoot at the monster, and you're rewarded for being able to hit the monster accurately. Unlike some other shooter games, the bullet velocity for the bowguns is kind of slower, especially depending on what ammo type you're using, and I suppose that kind of gives it more of a raw feeling and less of a high-tech feeling. A lot of high-tech guns, they shoot like laser beams, right? Well, Monster Hunter World bowguns won't really shoot that way. The big difference between the light bowgun and the heavy bowgun, the light bowgun, in my opinion, they generally do a little bit less damage because they don't have as powerful of ammo types. The heavy bowguns have the more powerful heavy types like the cluster bombs, but the heavy bowguns, they're slower. When you hold them, you have these long roll animations, and when you're walking around, you walk very slowly when you're using the heavy bowgun, whereas when you're using the light bowgun, you walk very quickly. So with the light bowgun, you're just able to strafe around. With the heavy bowgun, you kind of have to use these very deliberate dodges where if you screw them up, you're probably going to take damage, and then of course you can't just strafe because you're too slow to strafe. So that's the light bowgun, and for most of the regard, that's the heavy bowguns as well. The heavy bowguns, I guess I should add one more thing. Heavy bowguns, you're actually able to give them a shield. So you're actually able to guard with the heavy bowguns if that's your thing as well. And finally, the last weapon we'll talk about, and one of the most popular weapons in the game, the bows. Bows are the last ranged weapon in the game. You spend most of your time shooting. I feel like they're a pretty good crossover from melee weapons. You see, with the bowguns, those are very technical and you spend all your time dealing with the ammo. The bow is really rewarding you more based on how good you are at using combinations, being able to pull off lengthy combos, but also it's rewarding you for your skill at aiming and your skill at dodging. The bows have a very frantic feel to them where you have to play close to the monster and you're constantly dancing around, very similar to the dual blades. However, unlike the dual blades, you're able to reach different parts of the monster's body. See, the dual blades, they were restricted by their range. The bows really aren't that restricted by their range. This is also kind of nice because they can usually afflict one or two status ailments. Similar to the bowguns have access to a lot of status ailments, while bows usually have one or two status ailments as well. Well, that was my brief description of all the different weapons in Monster Hunter World. Obviously, I'm not trying to teach you how to use them. If you're looking for guides, there's a lot of guides out there. My goal, again, is to just help you guys understand what the playstyle is like so that you can get in there and kind of make decisions on your own about what you want to invest your time in and what you think is going to be fun. Alright, well, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Really? Oh my gosh, you guys! I just want to thank y'all so much!